Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone. Today we are starting a new topic, and today I picked a sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya number 66, the Laṭukikopama Sutta, or the simile of the quail. And this is a sutta that deals with different people, and how they are attached to different things, and how it is easy for some people to let things go, and for other people it's very difficult to let things go. They're very much attached to things, to people, and especially to their own views. And so the Buddha is talking about this issue and giving some strategies how to reflect about this and how to learn to let things go. And so in this sutta, the simile of the quail, the Buddha has just laid down a new training rule for the monastics, so a new rule for the Vinaya. And some people were quite happy to train in this, and other people were very reluctant to train in this, and they had all sorts of views and thought it was silly to follow this rule, and they criticized the Buddha and they criticized the other monastics who were wanting to train. And so with this as a basis, the Buddha gave this sutta teaching. And so it's quite interesting to see how some people, even back then, were quite attached to their views. Very similar to nowadays. So I think this is a sutta that is very applicable and that's very relatable. And so I think it would be really nice to have a look at this. And probably we will do half of it today and the other half next time, because it's quite a long sutta. So I've put a link in the live chat if you want to follow along. The link is to Bhante Sujata's translation, and I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So let's start, and the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the country of the Anguttarapans, where there was a town of theirs named Apana. Then, when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, he went into Apana for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Apana, and had returned from his alms round after his meal, he went to a certain grove for the day's abiding. Having entered the grove, he sat down at the root of a tree for the day's abiding. So this is the usual sutta opening. The Buddha is going on alms round, and then he's going to a secluded place in the forest to meditate for the rest of the day. And then also, when it was morning, the Venerable Udayan dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, he too went into Apana for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Apana and had returned from his alms round after his meal, he went to that same grove for the day's abiding. Having entered the grove, he sat down at the root of a tree for the day's abiding. Then, while the Venerable Udayan was alone in meditation, the following thought arose in his mind. How many painful states has the Blessed One rid us of? How many pleasant states has the Blessed One brought us? How many unwholesome states has the Blessed One rid us of? How many wholesome states has the Blessed One brought us? So the Venerable Udayan is also meditating in that forest. And while he's meditating, he's experiencing a lot of bliss, a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, because he's reflecting how beneficial it has been for him to follow the Buddha, and how many unwholesome things he was able to abandon with the help of the Buddha, and how many wholesome things have come to him because of the Buddha's teaching. So he's very joyful, he's very elated. And then the sutta continues, then when it was evening, the Venerable Udayan rose from meditation, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and told him, "Here, Venerable Sir, while I was alone in meditation, the following thought arose in my mind. How many painful states has the Blessed One rid us of? How many pleasant states has the Blessed One brought us? How many unwholesome states has the Blessed One rid us of? And how many wholesome states has the Blessed One brought us?" And now he's going into a little bit more detail what exactly he's thinking about when he says this. And he says, "Venerable Sir, formerly we used to eat in the evening, in the morning, and during the day outside the proper time. Then there was an occasion when the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, 'Bhikkhus, please abandon the daytime meal, which is outside the proper time.' Venerable Sir, I was upset and sad, thinking faithful householders give us good food of various kinds during the day outside the proper time. Yet the Blessed One tells us to abandon it, the Sublime One tells us to relinquish it. Out of our love and respect for the Blessed One, and out of shame and fear of wrongdoing, we abandoned that daytime meal, which was outside the proper time." So here, Udayan tells us that he is not thinking about any kind of deep jhana or any attainment of stream entry or arahantship or any psychic powers or anything that is very extraordinary and very special and very amazing. When he is rejoicing in the Buddha's teaching, he's actually thinking about quite mundane things. He's thinking about the rule about the proper time for taking a meal, so the proper time to eat for monastics. So I think this is quite interesting, quite amazing, because usually when we think about the Buddha's teaching and the benefits we can get, we think about like attaining nibbana, or we think about psychic powers or the blissful states in jhana. But actually, for many people, that's not something we immediately experience after we start practicing. So it's about, but we do experience a lot of small benefits that we get in our daily life when we practice the Buddha's teaching. And actually, it's well worth like noting them, rejoicing in them, paying attention to them, because all these small things actually make a big impact in our daily life, because that's what we sort of experience all the time, every single day. So noting them and rejoicing in that can bring us a lot of like joy and happiness in our mind, in the same way that just this kind of minor thing about having the meal at a certain time brought to Udayan. And Udayan, he says, actually at the beginning it was very difficult for him. So we learned that in the beginning, when like in the early stages of the Sangha, when the Vinaya hadn't been properly or fully laid down yet, and many rules weren't like in place yet, the Sangha actually ate several times a day. Actually, they had 3 meals a day, in the morning, in the middle of the day, and then in the evening. And gradually, the Buddha abolished those meals, except for the meal in the morning time. And the first meal that he abolished was the one that was in the middle of the day. So at some point, he just told the bhikkhus, please stop eating that midday meal. And Udayan tells us that at first this was actually quite challenging and quite difficult for him. He was quite attached to that meal. And he thought, well, we get so much good food, and the householders are making merit. They are faithful. They're making merit. And now, for some reason, the Buddha tells us to abandon it. And it seems that Udayan at first didn't quite understand why the Buddha told him or told all the monastics to abandon that meal. But Udayan says, oh, well, out of respect, because the Buddha is the teacher, so out of respect for him and out of faith in the Buddha, he had trust in the Buddha. He didn't quite understand the reasoning, but he had enough trust that he would go along with it and see where that takes him, and trust the Buddha that that would lead to a wholesome outcome and to something beneficial, and that would be helpful for him on the path. So he says, out of love and respect for the Buddha, he went along, even though it was really challenging and difficult, and even though he had a bit of suffering in his mind when that rule was laid down. And then Udayan continues and says, then we ate only in the evening and in the morning. Then there was an occasion when the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, bhikkhus, please abandon that night meal, which is outside the proper time. Venerable Sir, I was upset and sad, thinking, the Blessed One tells us to abandon the more sumptuous of our 2 meals. The Sublime One tells us to relinquish it. Once, Venerable Sir, a certain man had obtained some soup during the day, and he said, put that aside, and we will all eat it together in the evening. Nearly all dishes are prepared at night, few by day. Out of our love and respect for the Blessed One, and out of shame and fear of wrongdoing, we abandoned that night meal, which was outside the proper time. So at some later point, the Buddha also abolished the evening meal and asked the monastics only to eat in the morning. And that was also challenging because the evening meal was actually the more, like as they say here, the more sumptuous one. So the one that had more dishes, more variety, a bigger selection of foods. So it was difficult for people to get used to the idea to abandon that. And Udayan also said that he had a bit of suffering in his mind when the Buddha laid down that rule. But again, because he had a lot of trust, a lot of faith, and a lot of respect for the Buddha, he went along, even though he was suffering and even though it didn't immediately make sense to him. But then as he was practicing, the following thing happened. He was reflecting in the following way. It has happened, Venerable Sir, that bhikkhus wandering for alms in the thick darkness of the night have walked into a cesspool, fallen into a sewer, walked into a thorn bush, and walked into a sleeping cow. They have met hoodlums who had already committed a crime and those planning one, and they have been sexually enticed by women. Once, Venerable Sir, I went wandering for alms in the thick darkness of the night. A woman washing a pot saw me by a flash of lightning and screamed out in terror, "Mercy me, a devil has come for me." I told her, "Sister, I am no devil. I am a bhikkhu waiting for alms." Then it's a bhikkhu whose mass died and whose past died. Better, bhikkhu, that you get your belly cut open with a sharp butcher's knife than this prowling for alms for your belly's sake in the thick darkness of the night. Venerable Sir, when I recollected that, I thought, how many painful states has the Blessed One rid us of? How many pleasant states has the Blessed One brought us? How many unwholesome states has the Blessed One rid us of? And how many wholesome states has the Blessed One brought us? So here we see that when Udayan reflects on all the benefits that he got from the Buddha's teaching, the wholesome states that he developed and the pleasant states that he experienced, he's not actually thinking about jhanas or stream entry or anything like that. He's thinking about much more mundane things. He's just glad that he no longer has to fear encountering criminals at night or falling into some kind of pit or running into a sleeping cow or something when it's dark. So it's much, much more mundane, and even that much brings a lot of joy to his mind. And I think this is something that's well worth reflecting on, all the mundane, the immediate, the everyday benefits that we can get from practicing Dhamma and from just living an ethical life and having a calm mind and having a peaceful mind and being mindful and having a purpose in our life. So even that much can already bring a lot of joy to our mind, even if we don't necessarily all attain jhana or all become arahants in this life. And so here we see all the dangers that a bhikkhu could encounter if they go for alms at the wrong time, late at night, for example, in the evening, and so on. They can fall into various pits, walk into a thorn bush, or encounter a cow. So the thing about encountering a cow, maybe that doesn't seem very dramatic or very dangerous to us, but actually in the suttas we have a lot of stories of bhikkhus that were trampled to death by cows, so that were killed by cows. And even nowadays, in modern times, people sometimes get killed by cows. So cows to us, they sometimes seem like they're very very passive and not very aggressive, and they don't do much. They just stand around and eat grass. But they can actually, when they're startled, they can actually charge and run towards people and trample people. So even nowadays that can happen, that people die because of cows. And back then we actually had several stories. So that is a real danger that he's talking about here. Then, of course, you can encounter criminals, and all sorts of unfortunate events can happen. And of course, when you're there and people don't expect you to be there in the middle of the night, they can get scared, just as that woman got scared and thought that he was some kind of devil or some kind of ghost or something. And then she cursed him, or she cursed his parents in some way. So this sentence here, a bhikkhu whose ma has died and whose pa has died, this is a sentence that's a little bit difficult to translate. It's not immediately obvious what it means, but it seems to be some kind of curse because she was startled and because she was frightened. So she just blurted out this kind of insult towards his parents. And of course, she points out to him that it would even be better if your belly were cut open with a sharp butcher's knife than to wander around for alms in the middle of the night and startle people and frighten people and cause all these unfortunate events. So obviously enduring a little bit of hunger, like the pain that comes from hunger, is much, much less intense than actually being stabbed with a knife in your belly. So the woman says that even if you were stabbed with a knife, even if the pain was that strong, you shouldn't go for alms in the middle of the night. But usually, obviously, being hungry at night isn't quite as bad as that. So it's not worth going for alms and, risking all these problems. And as Udayan is reflecting on all the dangers that he no longer has to encounter and all the insults that he no longer has to take from random women that get frightened by him, he just reflects how happy he is and how blessed he feels that the Buddha has indeed laid down those rules, even though at first he didn't quite understand why the rules were there. And now the Buddha is also picking up the theme that Udayan is talking about here. And now the Buddha is giving a teaching to Udayan. And the Buddha says, "So too, Udayan, there are certain misguided men here who, when told by me, abandon this, say, 'What? Such a mere trifle, such a little thing as this? This recluse is much too exacting.' And they do not abandon that, and they show discourtesy towards me as well as towards those bhikkhus desirous of training. For them, that thing becomes a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke. Suppose, Udayan, a quail were tethered by a rotting creeper and would thereby expect injury, captivity, or death. Now suppose someone said, 'The rotting creeper by which that quail is tethered and thereby expects injury, captivity, or death is for her a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether.' Would he be speaking rightly? No, Venerable Sir, for that quail, the rotting creeper by which she is tethered and thereby expects injury, captivity, or death, is a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke. So too, Udayan, there are certain misguided men here who, when told by me, abandon this, say, 'What? Such a mere trifle? Such a little thing as this? This recluse is much too exacting.' And they do not abandon that, and they show discourtesy towards me, as well as towards those bhikkhus desirous of training. For them, that thing becomes a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke." So now here the Buddha points out that there were certain members of the Sangha, when he laid down the rule, or when he lays down any kind of rule, or when he gives any kind of instruction or any kind of suggestion for training, they might feel that it's such a trifling matter, it's not worth paying attention to, it's not worth following. And I think we all know people like this, so maybe we have thought ourselves in the same way. And we always want to focus on meditation and the higher stages of development and the higher mind, and so we don't want to pay attention to our daily life and all the small like the rules that affect our daily life, such as what time to eat, and all the minor, for the monastics, the minor Vinaya rules, but also for the lay people, there are ethical rules, the 5 precepts and other suggestions, 8 precepts, and other instructions for living a good life. And we might feel that this isn't really all that relevant to our meditation practice, or we don't want to limit what we perceive as our freedom to make decisions. So we feel like it's too much to put all this into practice, and it's just, as the Buddha says here, such a trifling little thing, so we don't have to pay attention to this. And so the Buddha points out, well, actually it is quite a trifling little thing, but once we become attached to it, and once we refuse to actually train in that, and once we refuse to let it go, the tiny little thing actually becomes a very strong bond that fetters us to samsara, that the attachment becomes stronger and stronger. So the problem is actually our attachment to the thing, not the tiny thing itself. And as the Buddha points out here, sometimes they can, like in this simile, there's a simile of this quail. So a quail is a really, really small bird, it's quite weak. And if a quail is bound with a rotting creeper, so a rotting creeper is like really, it's like weak, it's already almost falling apart. It should be very easy to break. But because the quail is so small and so weak, even that rotting creeper is a very strong bond, and she cannot break free. And because she cannot break free, she will encounter a lot of suffering as a result, injury, captivity, or death. And in the same way, even though a matter can be very trifling, if we start to attach to it, and if we become worked up about it, and if we make a big deal out of it, instead of just letting it go, then even that small trifling thing can become a very strong fetter that binds us to samsara and that binds us to suffering. And we are unable to let that go and develop on the path. And as the Buddha points out, if we do that, then we're actually disrespectful to the Buddha, because the Buddha tells us to train in this, and the Buddha obviously can see what is wholesome. So out of faith in the Buddha, even if we ourselves maybe can't see it at the moment, in the same way that Udayan couldn't see a benefit in the beginning, maybe out of faith and trust in the Buddha, we could just try it out and just let it go, instead of stubbornly thinking that we know better and we is clinging to our own like views and our own opinions and defilements. And then the Buddha gives the opposite simile, or the opposite story of someone who does the opposite. And he says, Udayan, there are certain clansmen here who, when told by me, abandon this, say, what? Such a mere trifle? Such a little thing to be abandoned as this? The Blessed One tells us to abandon, the Sublime One tells us to relinquish. Yet they abandon that and do not show discourtesy towards me or towards those bhikkhus desirous of training. Having abandoned it, they live at ease, unruffled, subsisting on others' gifts, with minds as aloof as the wild deer's. For them, that thing becomes a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether. Suppose Udayan, a royal tusker elephant, with tusks as long as chariot poles, full-grown in stature, high-bred, and accustomed to battle, were tethered by stout leather thongs. But by simply twisting his body a little, he could break and burst the thongs and then go where he likes. Now suppose someone said, the stout leather thongs by which this royal tusker elephant is tethered are for him a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke. Would he be speaking rightly? No, venerable sir, the stout leather thongs by which that royal tusker elephant is tethered, which by simply twisting his body a little he could break and burst and then go where he likes, are for him a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether. So to Udayan, there are certain clansmen here who, when told by me, abandon this, say, what, such a mere trifle, such a little thing to be abandoned as this? The Blessed One tells us to abandon, the Sublime One tells us to relinquish. Yet they abandon that and do not show discourtesy towards me or towards those bhikkhus desirous of training. Having abandoned it, they live at ease, unruffled, subsisting on others' gifts, with mind as aloof as a wild deer's. For them, that thing becomes a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether. So here we have the opposite people, and again, the Buddha is making a suggestion or laying down a rule. And they also think, well, this is actually quite a small thing, and it's quite trifling. But still, out of faith and trust in the Buddha, they just let it go. They just relinquish it. Because, I mean, after all, if it is trifling, then we should all be able to relinquish it. Then it really doesn't matter if we cling to our own opinion or let it go, because the thing is so small. We should really be able to let it go. There's no need for us to cling to our own opinion. So because the thing is trifling, it should be very easy to relinquish, and those people here are actually able to relinquish it. And by relinquishing it, they show respect to the Buddha. Because they listen to him as a teacher, they take him seriously. They don't just dismiss him. They don't cling to their own opinions. And of course, they also by that also show respect to the other monastics who are willing to train. So they're not criticizing them. They're not putting them down. They train alongside with everybody else. And since they are able to let it go, they then live at ease, because they're not strongly attached. If you're not strongly attached, your mind will be calm, will be peaceful. You don't get worked up about this small, tiny thing. You just let it go. You just follow along with the instruction, and then it's very easy for you. Your life is very, very, very calm and very peaceful. And as it says here, you live at ease, you live unruffled, you live with the mind very aloof. Here the image is of that of a wild deer. So a wild deer is very swift, very quick. They can just run free in the forest, so they can roam wherever they like. They are very, very, very free and very unbound. And the mind of such a person would be very similar, very aloof from society and very non-attached. And then, of course, there is the simile of the royal elephant. Royal elephant is a huge animal, exact opposite of that tiny quail. And such a royal elephant can even break a very strong bond, even those leather thongs. It's very easy for him to break. And so in the same way, for such a monastic who trains in that way, or a practitioner who trains in that way, it's very easy to break even strong attachments, let alone the little ones. And of course, the image of an elephant is an image that we find in many places in the suttas, and often the elephant is compared with an arahant, because the elephant is the biggest animal, at least the biggest land animal. And so it's often compared with an arahant as like the being who is the highest developed. And here in this case, obviously, the person that is here compared to a royal Tusker elephant is not an arahant yet, is still somebody who is in training, but still the image is there of somebody who is spiritually a developed being, who has become like spiritually let's say a big being, a great being in that sense. That's the image also that the arahant sort of, or the elephant conveys. And then the Buddha continues, and he uses two more similes to talk about the exact same issue from another angle, just to make it more easily understandable, again, to explain a little bit more about those fetters and those attachments. And the Buddha says, suppose, Udayin, there were a poor, penniless, destitute man, and he had one dilapidated hovel open to the crows, not the best kind, and one dilapidated wicker bedstead, not the best kind, and some grain and pumpkin seeds in a pot, not the best kind, and one hag of a wife, not the best kind. He might see a bhikkhu in a monastery park, sitting in the shade of a tree, his hands and feet well washed after he had eaten a delicious meal, devoting himself to the higher mind. He might think, how pleasant the recluse's state is, how healthy the recluse's state is. If only I could shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. But being unable to abandon his one dilapidated hovel open to the crows, not the best kind, and his one dilapidated wicker bedstead, not the best kind, and his grain and pumpkin seeds in a pot, not the best kind, and his hag of a wife, not the best kind. He is unable to shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. Now suppose someone said, the tethers by which that man is tethered, so that he cannot abandon his one dilapidated hovel, his bedstead, his seeds in a pot, and his wife, his one hag of a wife, not the best kind, and shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. For him those are a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether. Would he be speaking rightly? No, venerable sir, the tethers by which that man is tethered, so that he cannot abandon his one dilapidated hovel, his bedstead, his seats, and his hag of a wife, not the best kind, and shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. For him those are a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke. So here we have another example of the Buddha, and again this shows us that the attachment is not about the actual material thing. The attachment obviously is something in our mind that we are unable to let go. So in this case, here is a man or a person that is very poor, possesses very, very low quality material items, and also his relationship doesn't seem to be the best one, has a very undesirable partner, really like a hut that is very dilapidated. His furniture is basically falling apart. He has very low quality food, and also doesn't seem like he has a lot of food, only like a small amount in one pot. And then of course a partner that doesn't seem to be particularly attractive, and they don't seem to match particularly well. And then that person sees a monastic, and they recognize that there's that form of life would be much superior to the life that they are leading now. So they already have some wisdom, they have some insight, they can see that there is a superior way, and they do have some kind of a wish to go forth as a monastic. So the person reflects, if only I could shave off my hair and beard and put on the yellow robe and go forth from the home life into homelessness. So the person has some kind of insight, but the attachment to that hut and that dilapidated bedstead and that to that partner, even though they don't match at all, the attachment to all those things and are so strong that he is not able to actually let that go and go forth. So it's just because we have a lot of habit energies, and even if our habits are not particularly wholesome, and even if the material things that we possess are not particularly good and we don't get particularly much pleasure from them, our habit energies are so strong that we just keep on doing those same things over and over again. And we are scared to actually try out something new, even if there's a potential to dramatically improve our life. And that is the attachment, and that is the fetter that binds him to samsara, and that binds him to suffering. So that person sees a better life, they could change, but they're not able to actually let go and move on. So this is the one kind of person. And then the Buddha again shows us the opposite. And he says, so too Udayan. Oh, sorry, this was the next one. Suppose, Udayan, there were a rich householder or a householder's son with great wealth and property, with a vast number of gold ingots, a vast number of granaries, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce this. Let's say granaries. A vast number of fields, a vast amount of land, a vast number of wives, and a vast number of men and women slaves. He might see a bhikkhu in a monastery park, sitting in the shade of a tree, his hands and feet well washed after he had eaten a delicious meal, devoting himself to the higher mind. He might think, how pleasant the recluse's state is, how healthy the recluse's state is. If only I could shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. And being able to abandon his vast number of gold ingots, his vast number of granaries, his vast number of fields, his vast amount of land, his vast number of wives, and his vast number of men and women slaves, he is able to shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. Now suppose someone said, the tethers by which that householder or householder's son is tethered, so that he can abandon his vast number of gold ingots, his property, his wives, and so on, and his vast number of men and women slaves, and shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. For him, those are a strong, stout, tough, unrotting tether and a thick yoke. Would he be speaking rightly? No, venerable sir, the tethers by which that householder or householder's son is tethered, so that he can abandon his vast number of gold ingots and his property, his wives, and his vast number of men and women slaves, and shave off his hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. For him, those are a feeble, weak, rotting, quarrelous tether. So to Udayin, there are certain clansmen here who, when told by me, abandon this. They say, what? Such a mere trifle, such a little thing to be abandoned as this? The Blessed One tells us to abandon, the Sublime One tells us to relinquish. Yet they abandon that and do not show discourtesy towards me or towards those bhikkhus desirous of training. Having abandoned it, they live at ease, unruffled, subsisting on others' gifts, with mind as aloof as a wild deer's. For them, that thing becomes a feeble, weak, rotting, coreless tether. And so here we have the opposite, a person that is very rich, that has a vast amount of properties, lots of money, very pleasant partners, lots of servants, lives a very, very pleasant life, very comfortable life, doesn't experience much suffering at all. And still, they also encounter a monastic, and they also reflect in the same way. And they see that this is a higher kind of life, a better kind of life. If you could actually go forth and ordain and practice a spiritual path, then that would actually be much superior to his life of wealth and his comfortable lay life. And even though he's so rich and he has so much pleasure in his life, he is actually able to let that go, and he is actually able to go forth into homelessness and to become a monastic. And so that person isn't bound by his material possessions. That person is not attached that much. They can let it all go, and they can move on from their old habits and from their old attachments, and they're not that fearful about new things. They're able to make that step into the unknown and dramatically change their life and take the chance to actually dramatically improve their life. Because they're not attached, because they can easily move forward, because they can easily move on and change things. And so they're not bound by all these vast material possessions. And so again, we see that the attachment obviously is not dependent on the quality of the items or the outside world or the material possessions that we have or the persons that we live with, our families, our partners, and so on. The attachment is all in the mind, and the outside things really don't matter, whether that's high quality or low quality, or whether there's a lot of suffering or a lot of happiness. It doesn't really matter. It's our mind that either has very strong attachment that doesn't allow us to move on, or that has very little attachment and easily allows us to try out new things and to actually make progress in the Dhamma and to take those big steps and to dramatically change our life if we see that there is a benefit that might come from that. And so the Buddha says in the same way, some people can listen to the Buddha, they can trust him, and even if they don't really fully understand why the Buddha says something, or even if they think, oh, it's actually quite a small thing, such a trifle, they're still able to listen to the Buddha and to let go of their own view and their own thinking that this is silly and this is a trifle and this is not worth spending time on, and they just listen to the Buddha and just abandon that thing. And again, as I mentioned before, if you really think it's such a trifle and if it's not worth thinking about and if it's not worth listening to the Buddha because it's such a trifle, since it is such a trifle, you might as well let go of your own opinion and just go along with the Buddha's opinion. If you really think it's a trifle and it doesn't matter that much, then why cling to your own opinion? Just do it the way the Buddha suggests. I mean, that's the other way around. You don't have to cling to your own opinion then. But sometimes it can be very difficult for us, because obviously, especially for people, I think in the modern world, we are so much used to having so much freedom. We don't like other people interfering with our lives. We're quite individualistic. Everything has to go the way that we want. it's quite difficult for us to see how we are attached to our view in that way, because our whole society conditions us to think that that is freedom, that we can make all these choices. And what actually happens is that we just let our own, that we don't actually have freedom to make our own decisions. It's just our defilements that are pushing us into certain directions, and we're not able to see that because we don't really see the attachment. And so what we're actually doing is just following our defilements and just strengthening our bad habits in the mind. And so sometimes just going along with someone else, even if we think that is difficult, can actually open up a completely different point of view and show us where we are attached, and show us some blind spots that we might actually have that we haven't seen before. So that can be a very, very valuable test, or a very valuable lesson, if we just sometimes go against our own wishes and go along with someone else and see where that takes us, and why that is so challenging for us, and why we are so attached to doing things our own way. So for today, I think we're going to stop here, and we will finish the rest of this sutta next week. And for now, if you have any questions or comments, then you can leave them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So far, I don't see any question. I see not even many comments. Gita says she likes the sutta. I'm glad you like it. I think this is a really beautiful sutta. And Buddha Ruchi says, this sutta puts the issue of major and minor precepts into an interesting light. Yeah, I think so, especially where there are certain interesting factors when we look at major and minor precepts. So usually the major precepts, they have an ethical implication. So there is something that is ethically wrong if we break that precept, such as, for example, killing a human being. Obviously, I don't have to explain why that would be a problem, or stealing, or things like that. For the minor precepts, some of the minor precepts have an ethical dimension to them, such as killing an animal, for example, or causing pain to other people, or causing problems, or causing pain to animals, or something like that. But many of the smaller precepts don't necessarily have an ethical dimension, but they have these kind of training values, and they serve in some way to help us to see where our attachments are and where our defilements are. And sometimes the precepts that we have the most problems with are those that can give us the biggest lessons. And that can really show us where our blind spots are and where our attachments still are. So that can be very helpful. And nobody said before that they can relate to this. I think they said that in relationship to that person who was attached to the dilapidated hovel and the wicker bedstead and the pumpkin seeds and the hag of a wife. Yeah, so sometimes, even though our life isn't that perfect, we are still really reluctant to move on and to change things and to try out something new, even if sometimes we see that there is a better way, such as this person here saw the monastic and saw that there was a spiritual path, and that would be really a good way of life. And they are actually reflecting how pleasant is the reclusive state and how healthy it is. So they did really see all the benefits, and still we are attached, and still we cannot move on. So yeah, that sometimes it's really our old habits that are holding us back, and we need a lot of energy to overcome them. And then Buddha Ruchi also says, didn't the Buddha never answer the question as to which are major and which minor? And so Venerable said, we need to keep them all. Yeah, the monastics need. So, well, it's not that clear. So in the Vinaya, it's very clear. There are there are precepts that we call the heavy precepts, and there are precepts that we call the minor precepts, and the heavy ones are the so-called parajikas and the sanghadisesas, so the two most serious kinds of classes of offenses in our patimokkha, and all the others are considered minor precepts, and that is actually stated quite directly in the Vinaya. So yeah, there was a confusion at the first council. So the first council is a meeting that bhikkhus held after the Buddha's parinibbana, so after the Buddha passed away into Nibbana and was no longer around, 500 bhikkhus came together, 500 monks came together and debated on various issues. And they actually said that the Buddha, actually before the Buddha had passed away, he allowed that minor precepts could be abandoned, especially for this reason, because some of them don't have an ethical dimension, and some of them are actually made for a certain time and for a certain place and for certain cultural customs that might not actually be applicable as time goes on, as cultures change, as Buddhism spreads to other countries and so on, where people have different kinds of defilements and where other things might need to be practiced. So the Buddha did give that allowance to abolish the minor precepts. But yeah, according to the story that we have of this first council, the monks didn't quite agree which are the minor ones, and so they decided to keep all of them. However, that is not a ruling that is actually binding for the Sangha nowadays. That was just a ruling that was binding for those 500 monks. But because those 500 monks were arahants and were considered leaders of the community, so nowadays most people think that it's probably good to keep all of them. But it's not a ruling that is absolutely binding to everybody nowadays. So we can still abolish minor precepts if we feel that we need to, or if we have a good reason for doing that. However, most people choose not to. Albert says, we're definitely chasing our defilements in this modern age, all the while calling it freedom. Yeah, I think that is exactly what this sutta is about. People just want to have the freedom to follow their defilements, and they don't really see that what they are doing. So that can be quite tricky. And sometimes it's just good to challenge us and see where our attachments lie, because attachments can be quite sneaky and sometimes not easy to see. And Claudia says, what to do if you would like to give up lay life, but there are certain responsibilities like looking after old parents or children don't allow us this step. So I think that is a different situation, somewhat different to what is described here in this sutta, because in that case, it's not really attachment or old habit patterns or fear of the unknown that is holding people back, but it's actually responsibilities to close family members. And yeah, sometimes life isn't perfect, and sometimes we find us in a situation where we feel that we cannot abandon those responsibilities. And also we have to consider, like, if those people went forth and the whole time they couldn't really be happy in monastic life, and they would always feel like they are bad people, unethical people, because they abandoned family members that were dependent on them, and they would feel very guilty, then obviously their monastic life wouldn't be fruitful, and they wouldn't be happy in monastic life, and they couldn't properly develop. So in that case, it's often better to follow your own heart, to follow your own conscience, and to do what you think you need to do, and and just practice as well as you can in the circumstances that you're in. And maybe at some point circumstances will change and allow for people to go forth. And sometimes people just have to accept that in this life, maybe it's not going to work out. And then you just try to practice as well as you can, make as much good karma, plant as many good seeds as you can. And then hopefully, if you have enough good seeds in the next life, things will be better and conditions will be more favorable to going forth. But yeah, samsara isn't perfect, and we don't always have the perfect opportunities to go forth and to practice in a monastic form. And Nobody says, lately I have been feeling I must reject my life. Everything seems to be telling me this, but how do I find that energy to do that? I feel very lost and depressed. Well, the first thing is that taking a monastic path is not a rejection of lay life. It's really understanding that there is something better. And out of compassion for yourself and out of compassion for all beings, you want to take the next step in a positive way. It's not that we reject lay life and think this is all terrible. It's just that we think this is also good. We can also practice well there, but there is something better. So the mindset is very different. The mindset is actually a positive and a happy mindset. It's not that we reject things and cultivate aversion. So that motivation, going forth out of aversion, is actually quite a difficult motivation, and it's quite difficult to develop well in the monastic path if you have this kind of motivation. And if you feel stuck and if things are difficult, then the best thing is to just go and visit monasteries and just stay there for a while and just, go on a retreat or just live with a monastic community for a little bit, for a week, for 2 weeks. See how that feels. See if you can actually imagine living there long term, or just slowly ease into such a process. So you don't have to take a big step all at once. Just try it out for a little while. If you like it, stay for a little bit longer. If you still like it, ask if there's some kind of residency program where you could stay for a few months, just help out with the community, live with the monastics. And if things still feel really good, then slowly you can think about taking a next step, formally taking higher precepts, or asking about a process towards ordination. So ordination also takes many years. And it's a long process, very involved process, and there you can take it as fast or as slow as you want. But it's good to just get it started. Just try it out for a little while, visit a few monasteries, and see where that takes you. And then Claudia also says, as well as not so easy to find an opportunity to ordain these days. So there can be quite some obstacles to go into homelessness. I feel in this case, I have to give up attachment to the wish to ordain. Yeah. Also, we don't live in the Buddha's time anymore. Obviously, things have changed dramatically since then. And also living a monastic life is not the same as how it was back then. So we don't typically have the same kind of entirely unburdened lifestyle that people used to have back then. Nowadays, even monastics, even being a monastic can be quite involved and quite busy. So people really have to find good conditions and have to also see what is suitable for them in their circumstances and for their character and for their situation in life, their age, their family background, their cultural background. And the Buddhist path is a very individual path. So people really have to figure out what works for them, and there's no one size fits all. And Bhavani says, Namaste. What is meant by seeing the things as they are? Thank you. So I believe in this sutta, it wasn't mentioned to see things as they are. So I'm guessing that you're referring to something that I said. Generally, it means understanding that, in Buddhist terms, it means having right view. So right view means understanding that things are conditioned, that things don't have an independent existence. Everything has a cause, and there's cause and effect. Everything is conditioned. And especially it also means to understand the 3 characteristics. So understanding that everything is impermanent. All our material things are impermanent, all our relationships are impermanent, our life is impermanent. So there's nothing that we should cling to, nothing that is stable and eternal. And we understand about the 4 Noble Truths, especially about suffering, unsatisfactoriness, And also we understand about not self, that there is no permanent stable personality. There's nothing that Christians call soul, or that Hindus call Atman, so our self. And everything is in a constant flux. Everything is constantly changing, and it's not changing at random. It's changing based on conditions. And because it is changing based on conditions, we ourselves can create conditions that are favorable for us, favorable for our practice, for developing wholesome states, for making progress on the Buddhist path, and for ultimately attaining Nibbana. So seeing things as they actually are means seeing things not as we wish them to be, or as our defilements want to trick us into believing that how they are, but actually in line with reality, that everything is unstable and impermanent, and that there is no permanent self there. Which is good news, because then we can change and we can develop, and we don't have to depend on some external forces or on some on fate and some fatalistic kind of thinking. So we have a lot of questions, so I think I have to go a little bit faster. Albert says, is there an age where one is too old to go forth into monastic life? Not necessarily, but it's easier if you go forth while you're somewhat younger. And it also depends very much on the community. In Asia, it's very easy to go forth at any age. In Western countries, places are very limited. It's quite difficult to go forth. So in Western countries, the older you get, the more difficult it becomes to find a place. But even in Western countries, there is not necessarily an age limit. You just have to search longer for a good community that fits you. And Buddha Ruchi says, nobody, I'm sorry to hear of your unhappy state. Take care of yourself. Yes, definitely. Please take care of yourself. As I mentioned in the beginning, this sutta is also about reflecting on all the blessings that we have in our life, even small things. So in the same way that this Udayan was reflecting on all the benefits that he got from such a small thing as not wandering around anymore at nighttime, he was so blissful, he was so happy as he was thinking about this. So in the same way, we should also reflect on small things that are blessings in our life. And small things that are good, that have developed in a wholesome way, small accomplishments that we have made. So really noting that and rejoicing in those small things is really, really valuable. And that really brightens up our mind. And that when our mind is bright and happy, it's also much more calm and peaceful, and it's really helpful, both for our daily life and also for our Dhamma practice. And Buddha Ruchi says, in India, I visited huge monasteries where it would be hard to believe that monastics didn't rub against one another in both pleasant and unpleasant ways, samsara and people being what they are. Yeah, that is certainly true. Whether the monastery is big or small, as long as there is more than one person there, you will always rub against one another sooner or later, whether that is in a monastery or in an intentional community, or at work, or in a partnership, or in a family. As long as there are two beings, they will eventually rub against each other. And nobody has another question. Many years ago, I had a very vivid dream. Two Buddhist monks, one old and one young. The young one told me he saw me with a yellow wax on my head. What could this possibly mean? So nobody, I really don't know what this could possibly mean. Sometimes dreams are just dreams, and they don't have any particular meaning. In this case, I don't know. It might have a meaning, but yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really help you with this question. Okay, and that was the last question for today. So thank you all for joining in. We will finish this sutta next time. For now, we will end today's session with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a good day and have a good week, and see you all next Tuesday.